Hi all, welcome to CodAffection. This is the third video in this series of videos showing how to build a complete auth system with Angular and ASP.NET Core Web API. In the first video, we have implemented user registration, and in the last video, we have discussed all about login operation with JSON Web Token. If you haven't watched these previous videos, links are given in video description and inside the first comment of this video. Now, in this video, we'll discuss all about authorization. First, we will see how to restrict Angular routes only for logged in users, and then we'll be consuming a protected Web API endpoint from Angular by passing the user token. After that, we'll thoroughly discuss how to implement Web API authorization with role, claim, and policy. To demonstrate the same in Angular, we'll create respective components and corresponding routes, and they will only be made accessible if the user has the necessary permissions. And then we will show how to hide HTML elements based on user claims or user permissions. And finally, we'll discuss how to handle unexpected request responses like 4.1 and 4.3. So I'm sure you will find this video really helpful going forward in your career. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, in this video, first of all, we are going to discuss how we can make an Angular route protected or private based on whether the user is already logged in or not. For example, let me log out from this application. At present, we are not authenticated to the app, but if you try to access this component or this route dashboard, you will get the access. It should be prevented. So that's the first thing that we are going to do in this video. So basically we are preventing unauthenticated access to this Angular app. After that, we can do the same in necessary ASP.NET Core Web API methods. So in order to prevent unauthenticated access to Angular routes, we'll be making use of Angular guards. You could see the same inside the documentation here, inside docs, inside this routing, go to common routing task, and then under this subheading, prevent unauthorized access, you could see the detailed explanation, starting with creating an Angular guard. So as per our app structure, we will be creating the auth guard inside the shared folder like this. Let me open the terminal, G for generate, and we want to create a guard, and that should be inside the folder shared, and we want to name it as auth guard. Hit enter. So basically within an Angular guard, we'll be adding some conditions or criteria, and that will decide whether we want to allow or disallow the access to the route that the user is trying to access. And within an Angular guard, we can implement any of these functions here. Each of them has different use cases. You will know better as we go further. Now select the types of methods that you want to implement inside the guard. For that, we can make use of the space bar like this. For now, I only want to implement this canActivate method. Now hit enter. So here we have the guard that we have just created, auth guard. So at present, auth guard is a function having this type here, canActivate. Now with this auth guard function, we'll be preventing unauthenticated access. So first of all, let's apply this guard to all the routes that we want to prevent from unauthenticated access. At present, we only want to make this dashboard route as protected. Now, since this auth guard is of the type canActivate, we have to pass this function inside an array having the name canActivate. So here is the array canActivate. Inside that, we can pass the function inside an array like this, auth guard. So any route having this auth guard passed to this canActivate will only be accessible or made available to the user if this auth guard returns the boolean value true. Now back to the auth guard. Inside this, we want to check whether the current user is already logged in or not. In order to check whether the user is already logged in or not, we only want to check whether we have saved a JSON web token inside the local storage. For that, I'm going to define a function inside the auth service is logged in. So here we have the return statement with a boolean expression. From the local storage, we want to retrieve the JSON web token that we have saved during the login operation. If it is not null, we'll return true, meaning that the user is already logged in. Else, we'll return false. Now back to auth card and let's invoke the method that we have just created. For that, first of all, we have to inject the auth service. Unlike a class, there is no constructor inside the function to do the normal way of dependency injection. For that, we can do this auth service. Now to inject an instance of the auth service, we could invoke this method inject and let's pass the name of the service auth service. Now let's invoke the method that we have just created is logged in. If the user is already logged in, we'll return true. Else, we'll redirect the user to the login page. For that, first of all, we have to inject the router, inject router from Angular router. Inside this else block, we can redirect the user to the login page. Navigate by URL. Inside that, let's pass /sign in. And finally, we have to return false. Now let me save this and back to the app. If you try to navigate the dashboard route, you will be redirected back to the login page again. See? Because you are not authenticated into this application. So from now onwards, in order to access any protected route, first of all, you have to authenticate it to the app like this. Boom. That's it. Now we have to do the same protection inside the ASP.NET Core Web API also. Now before doing that, I want to make some adjustments in the code that we have already written. First of all, inside the function that we have just defined is logged in, we have hard-coded the key name as token. It's not a best practice. If you want to change that in future for some valid reason, you have to do the changes in each of the places you have used it. So considering the situation, I'm going to update the app structure like this. Inside this shared folder, I'm going to add a new file, constants. This auth card is already created. Now we're going to create this file, constants. So here we have the shared folder. Let's create the file, constants. Inside that, we can create and export a constant with this name token key. So this is a best practice while naming constant variables. All the letters are in uppercase. Now into this variable, we can assign this value here, token. Now instead of hard coding, we can make use of the variable like this, token key. Now in previous video, we have hard coded the token as token, which you can see inside the components like login. See? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define separate functions to save or retrieve the value of the token into the local storage. So first of all, let's find all of the places where we have used local storage. So go to menu, then find in files, and let's search for local storage. So first of all, we have the dashboard component. During the logout operation, we have removed the token value. So let's define a function for the same. So go to the auth service. So here is the function delete token. From local storage, we can invoke this method remove item. Inside that, we want to pass the name of the key that we can access from the constant variable token key. Now back to the dashboard component. Let's inject the auth service here, private auth service of the type auth service class. Now let's invoke the method that we have just created, auth service dot delete token. Now inside the login component, when a user is successfully authenticated to the system, we have saved the user JSON web token like this. So let's define another function for saving the token. So here is the method save token having a single parameter token of the type string. Inside that, we could do this local storage dot set item. First of all, we'll pass the key name token key. As a second argument, we can pass this token parameter. Inside that, we have the JSON web token. Now back to login component. First of all, we have to inject the auth service, which we have already done as service. So here we go, service dot save token. As an argument, we can pass the token that we have received from the post request. So that's all for now regarding the best practices in retrieving and saving the JSON web token. Now back to what we have been doing. With this auth guard, we have prevented any unauthenticated access to this Angular app. All we have to do is just pass this auth card to the route that we want to make it protected or private. just like this dashboard. So from now onwards, this dashboard will only be available for authenticated users. Now I have some sort of the reverse requirement. That is, when an already logged in user tried to access the routes, sign in or sign up, we want to redirect the user back to the dashboard. So back to the login component. For that, we can make use of the ng onIt lifecycle hook inside the component. So first of all, let's implement the interface on init. Now let's define the function ng onInit. Inside that, first of all, we'll check whether the user is already logged in or not. For that, we can make use of the method from the auth service is logged in. If that's the case, we can make use of this router to redirect the user back to dashboard. So router dot navigate by URL, and let's pass the route /dashboard. Now let me copy this and then open the component registration. Let's implement the interface on init. Now let's paste the method that we have copied from the login component. Inside this component, we have not yet injected the router. So let's do that. Private router of the type Angular router. Save this, back to the app. Now if you try to access the routes, sign in or sign up, you will be redirected back to the dashboard. Now we have to do the same in ASP.NET Core Web API. That is preventing Web API endpoints from unauthenticated access. That is what we often refer it as authorization. So let me start with comparing the process of authentication and authorization. Authentication verifies whether a user is an insider or not. Now, the process authorization grants access to protected resource only if the user has necessary permission. We have already discussed authentication in great depth and implemented the same in previous video. Now this video is dedicated to authorization. Now you could see the same comparison inside the official documentation. Authentication is the process of determining a user's identity, while authorization is the process of determining whether a user has access to a resource. Like we have seen, during the process of authentication, the user will be making a post request with their own login credentials, and then the identity management solution will check whether there is a user with the given credentials or not. So that's the process of determining a user's identity. Now each user inside the system will be allocated with different roles or different permissions. Now in order to access a protected resource, the user must have the necessary permissions that the protected resource is asking for. So based on whether the user has the necessary permissions or not, authorization will grant or deny the request to access the protected resource. Now let's see them in action. Now we can divide Web API methods into three categories based on how we apply the authorization to them. So first of all, we have Web API methods that does not need any type of authorization. For example, consider the endpoints like user registration or sign-in. All of these should be open to anyone without any authorization criteria. And then we have the second category of Web API methods asking the basic or minimal criteria for authorization. That is, the user must be authenticated to the system. In case of JSON Web Token authentication, in order to access these types of Web API methods, the user must pass a valid JSON Web Token. So this authorization is asking for the minimal or basic criteria. We have just implemented this feature inside the Angular client side with the auth guard. Now let's do the same inside this ASP.NET Core Web API. For example, consider a getWebAPI method to retrieve user profile data. This endpoint should be accessible to any authenticated user. And then any Web API method asking authorization criteria, anything extra from being authenticated to the system, comes under this third category of Web API methods. So the criteria will include role, claim, and policy. We'll be discussing them in great depth. So first of all, I'm going to make a getWebAPI method for user profile, and it should be accessible to anyone authenticated to the system. So back to Visual Studio. First of all, I'm going to create a C# file for account endpoints. Now, like we have discussed in previous video, let's change this class into static. Now let me add an extension method like we have done inside this identity user endpoints. Let me copy this and pasting the same here. Let's rename this method to map account endpoints. We have already discussed these best practices in previous video. Now we're going to make a get request, so we can invoke this method map get, and the corresponding endpoint will be like this user profile. Now we can handle this request inside this private method get user profile. So here is the method private static get user profile. For now, from this method, we'll only return this string user profile. So let's change the return type of this method to string. Now in order to register this endpoint to this web API project, we have to invoke this method from this program.cs file. So here we go. So here we have a get web API method user profile. From that we are returning this string user profile. Now in order to restrict this web API method to the authenticated user, we can invoke this method require authorization, or we can apply this authorize attribute. Authorize attribute can be applied to the method that is handling the request. Let me build this project. Back to the API Explorer. So here we have the new get web API method user profile. Now if you try to access this web API method, you will get this error for node 1 unauthorized, meaning that you are not passing the minimum criteria for authorization, that is being authenticated to the system. So along with making this get request here, we have to pass the JSON web token that we get from sign-in operation or login operation. So first of all, let's sign in into the application. We have already created a user with these email and password, email@gmail.com. Then the password was string, then followed by hash simple. Let's make the request. So here we have successfully authenticated to the system. As a result of that, we got the JSON web token. Let me copy paste the same into Notepad. Now along with making a get request for this user profile, we have to pass this JSON web token. Remember this illustration from our second last video? Just now we have created a login operation and we got a JSON web token. Now we're going to make a request for accessing a protected resource. So inside the authorization header, we have to pass the JSON web token like this that we have just received. Upon reaching the request at the server side, it will validate the JSON web token, which we have already discussed in our second last video, explaining how much safe is a JSON web token. And we have already configured how this token validation is to be done while adding the authentication service. So inside this extension method, we call this method add authentication, and while invoking this method add JWT bearer, we have configured how we want to validate the JSON web token. And here we have specified what are the schemas that we are using for different handlers inside the identity solution. If there are multiple schemes involved in the process of authentication and authorization, you can set them separately like this. Since all of the handlers inside this project is managed by JWT scheme, we only need to pass the JWT scheme here instead of this lambda expression here. JWT bearer defaults.authentication scheme. Now here we have specified that we don't want to save the token inside the server once the token is generated. And through this token validation parameters, we have specified how we want to validate the JSON web token once it reaches the server as part of accessing a protected resource. So of course, we want to validate the token signature, and for that here we have given the secret key. Now along with this, I forgot to disable the validation of token issuer and token audience. So I will set this validate issuer as false and then validate audience. To explain in simple terms, while creating the JSON web token inside the sign-in operation here we have only passed the user ID. Along with that, we can pass the issuer, meaning the URL of this web API from which we have created the JSON web token, and the audience, meaning the URLs of the client-side applications. So if you want to make sure the issuer or audience that you have passed inside the JSON web token is the inside the receive JSON web token here. We can set this validate issuer and validate audience to true. By default, these Boolean properties is having the value true, so that's why we have set it as false here. Now it's time to make the HTTP request to access the protected resource. Along with the request authorization header, we have to pass the JSON web token. For that, if you have an API Explorer other than Swagger, then the process of making the GET request will be much easy. Let me show you how it is done. At present, we are not passing the JSON web token, so let me make the GET request again. Now, let me copy this URL. At present, inside my system, I already have the API Explorer Postman. From that, we can make the request like this. We need a GET request, and here is the corresponding URL. Inside this authorization header, we can set this bearer token. Then inside this text box, just pass the token that we have received. Let me copy this and pasting the same here. Send the request. Boom. We got the success response containing the string that we have sent from the web API method here. Now, if you want to see what's happening behind the scene while making this request, you can open this code panel here. Just expand it. See, while making the GET request inside the header, authorization header, the token is passed here. As a prefix, we have this bearer, just like what we have mentioned here. The same syntax should be used while passing the JSON web token inside the authorization header. You can achieve the same if you have installed the VS Code extension Thunder Client. Let's make a GET request, and here is the URL. Inside this auth header, we will select this bearer and we can just paste the token that we have received. Send the request. Boom. Now, coming back to our Swagger API Explorer, we don't have a direct way to modify the request header. If we want to achieve the same, we have to do the necessary configuration while adding the Swagger API Explorer inside the project, which we have done inside this extension method. We have to pass the necessary configuration inside this method add Swagger gen. For now, I will just copy paste the configuration that we need for sending the bearer token. So here we go. Here we have the lambda expression with this options parameter. You can copy paste this from our GitHub repository. Let me build this. Now inside the API Explorer, you could see this option for adding the bearer token. So first of all, we have defined a security definition with the name bearer. Inside that, we have set inside the authorization header, we want to pass the bearer token for JWT authentication. And for all the web API methods, we have given a security requirement for the bearer token. And that's the reason why along with all of these endpoints, you could see this log icon. So that's all about configuring the Swagger API Explorer for passing the JSON web token. I'm not getting into the detailed explanation. We are not focusing on Swagger API Explorer. You can just copy paste this code from our GitHub repo. So from now onwards, in order to access any protected resource, first you have to set the bearer token inside this text box here. So let me copy this JSON web token and pasting the same here. Click on Authorize. That's it. From now onwards, for all the requests, the authorization header will be set with the token like we have seen here. Now let's try to make the GET request. Boom. That's it. See how the JSON web token is passed inside the authorization header. So far, we have discussed how to deal with the second category of web API methods. Now, in any given web API project, most of the web API methods will come under this category. That is, web API method asking the minimum criteria that user must be at least authenticated to the system. So in order to avoid repeating this authorize attribute, we will apply this authorize attribute globally across all the web API methods. Let me show you how it is done. For that, back to the program.cs file. Here we have already added the authentication service into the project by invoking this method add authentication. Now along with that, we have to add the services for authorization. So here we go, services.add authorization. Now in order to set this authorize attribute globally across the web API, We can have this lambda expression with this parameter options. All we have to do is just define a fallback policy. You could think of policy as a criteria. Into that, we have to assign an instance of authorization policy builder. Along with that, in order to set the authentication scheme, we have to invoke this method add authentication schemes. Inside that, we can pass the JWT bearer scheme. JWT bearer defaults authentication scheme. And for all the Web API methods, we are asking for the user to be authenticated to the system, require authenticated user. And we have to finally call this method build. Sorry, we forgot to wrap everything inside a curly brackets like this. Now with this statement added here, for all the Web API methods, we have set the requirement that the user must be authenticated to the system in order to access any Web API method from this project. But there will be Web API methods like sign-in or user registration. They must be accessible to non-authenticated users. For that, we can make use of this allow anonymous attribute. So let's see how the Web API methods are responding with this statement added here. Let's build this project. Now, by the way, for each rebuild we do inside the Visual Studio, this Swagger UI will get reloaded and the previous JWT token that we have provided inside this authorization header will be lost. So at present, along with any of the requests, there is no token passed inside the authorization header. Now let's see whether we can make the post request for user login or user registration. See, we got the error for node 1 unauthorized. It's all because of this statement adding authorization attribute to all the Web API methods. Now let's see how to make Web API methods accessible for unauthenticated users. Inside this identity endpoints, we have Web API methods for user registration and sign-in. In order to make them accessible for unauthenticated user, along with this method invocation, we can change this method invocation allow anonymous. Or you can make use of this attribute allow anonymous. For this entire series, I will stick with attributes instead of methods. So let me remove this and let's copy paste the same attribute for this sign-in method also. Build the project. Let's make the request again. See, we are not getting the previous unauthorized error. Now we have to deal with this third type of Web API methods. Before getting into that, I want to show you how to retrieve the claims of a signed-in user. For example, inside this application, we have already created this getWebAPI method for user profile. Let's discuss how to retrieve the signed-in user claims and how we can make use of them. Inside the sign-in operation, we have added the payload containing the claims of the user. For example, at present, we only have this claim for user ID. As a result of successful authentication, we have passed the JSON token back to the column. And then from there onwards, we'll pass the JSON web token to access any protected resource, like we have done with the getWebAPI method for user profile. Now inside the user profile, we want to know how to retrieve the claim that we have added to the JSON web token during the successful authentication process. Now that's the job of auth middlewares. Now, like we have already discussed, when we make a request for accessing a protected resource along with JWT token inside the authorization header, before the request reach its destination, the auth middleware will verify whether this JSON web token is a valid token or not, based on what we have configured while adding the authentication middleware. Whatever we have given inside this token validation parameters will be taken into consideration for validating the token like we have already discussed. And when the JSON web token is successfully verified, the auth middlewares will decrypt or unpack the JSON web token into claims principal. Remember, while creating the JSON web token, we have passed the claims inside the JSON web token payload. During the process of verifying the JSON web token, the reverse will be happening. From the JSON web token payload, the claims will be populated with the corresponding values. So in order to access the authenticated user claims inside this user profile web method, we can make use of this claims principal. Now, in order to access the same claims principal, we just need to add this parameter here, claims principal. I will name it as user. So the value of this claims principal instance will be injected through dependency injection because of the service that we have added here. Along with adding the authentication services, here we have added the authorization services. It will add a dependency injection for the claims principal. And that's how we are able to access this claims principal inside this web API method. Now we can retrieve the user ID that we have added into the JSON web token during the successful authentication. So here we go. I'll create this variable user ID. Let's access the claims property from the user object. It's an enumerable collection of the claims that we have added to the token. From that, we can invoke this method first, and here we have the lambda expression to filter the user ID. X type is equal to user ID. Make sure to pass the same name that we have given while adding the same into the token. And we want to retrieve the value of the claim. Now, instead of returning this dummy string here, I want to return the user profile details with the user ID that we have retrieved here. For that, we can make use of the user manager, which is of the type app user. I will name it as user manager. So here we go, user details. From user manager, we can invoke this method find by ID async. Inside that, we can pass the user ID that we have retrieved from the claims principal. Since we have an async method here, let's prefix it with this keyword avoid. At the same time, this async keyword will be added to this method here. So we want to change the return type of this method as task iResult. Now let's return the user details inside the response. Results.ok. From that, we want to return an object like this. Email is equal to user details dot email. There is a possibility that this user details is null, so I will add this question mark here. Let me duplicate this. Now let's retrieve full name. Let's build this project. Back to the API Explorer. First of all, we have to add the JSON web token into this text box that I will copy paste from this notepad. Now let's make the GET request for user profile. Boom. So that's how to retrieve and make use of the claims of an authenticated user. Now let's head over to VS Code and let's see how to make a request from Angular to a protected web API endpoint by passing the saved JSON web token. To demonstrate the same, I will make a GET request to this user profile endpoint, and I want to display the full name of the logged in user inside the dashboard. For that, first of all, I will modify this app structure by adding this service class user. Inside that, we will do the operations related to the user other than authentication. Now let's create this service class user. So open the terminal, ng, g for generate, and we want to create the service class inside the shared folder within the folder services. And we want to name this service class as user. Hit enter. So here we have the newly created user service class. Now to make the GET request, first of all, let me inject the HTTP client. Now I will define this method get user profile. Inside that, we can make the GET request like this. HTTP.get method can be called. Inside that, we have to pass the URL of the endpoint. And this GET request will be returning an observable like we have done inside the auth service class here. We'll be returning the observable back to the caller. Now we have to pass the URL to this GET method. Inside this auth service, we have hard-coded the base URL like this, and for each HTTP request, we have appended the respective path like this. Now hard-coding this base URL is not a good practice. For that, we can make use of the environments folder inside the Angular app. So here is the folder and file that we are going to add into this application, environments. Inside that, we can create environment files for each execution mode of the app. By default, there are two files, environment.ts for production and environment.development.ts for development mode. Now, in order to create this file, we could do this. Let's open the terminal. You could see the respective Angular CLI command inside this reference, then CLI reference, then go to ng generate, and here we have the environments. Let me copy this and pasting the same inside the terminal, hit enter. So here we have the new folder environments. Inside that we have those two files like we have mentioned here. Now, as you can see inside this terminal, along with creating these two files, there is an update operation inside this angular.json file. Now we can discuss the update inside this angular.json file in a bit. So first of all, I will open this environments file environment.ts. Into this constant object environment, I'm going to add a property API base URL. Into that, we can assign the base URL of the web API that we have saved inside this auth service. So here it is. Let me copy paste the same into the new property. For now, I will just copy paste this object into this file environment.development.ts. Now to retrieve this property value, we could do this environment. We have to import this object environment like this without mentioning the extension of the file environments/environment. From that, we can access the base URL like this. Now for this user profile get request, we have to append this /user profile. In a bit, I will tell you the benefits of using these files from the environments folder. Before that, let's do the same changes inside this auth service. We don't need this base URL. Instead, we can retrieve it from the environment file environment.api base URL. Let me copy paste the same for this post request for the sign in operation. Now this is what is happening behind the scene. While creating the environments folder, I told you that there is an update inside this angular.json file. Inside this JSON file, if you search for file replacement, you could see this array here. So this is inside this object build. At present, this app is running at development environment, which you can see inside this object serve. Then inside this default configuration, you could see development. When we make this app public, we will change this configuration into production. So inside this file replacement array, you could see that when we are in development mode, this path here will be replaced with this file here. So inside the development mode, when we refer to the environment file, here we have imported from the environments folder, we have only mentioned it as environment, which file is not mentioned inside this import statement. That will be determined from this replacement configuration here. So this is a necessary requirement in the app development. During the production stage and the development stage, the configuration data will be different depending on the environment that we are running. In case of the production environment, instead of localhost, we'll be hosting the web API somewhere in public domain. So hope you understood how to make use of environment files and how to avoid hard coding the app config data. Now back to the method user profile. Now let's make use of this method inside this dashboard component. For that, we can implement the ng onInit lifecycle hook. Implements onInit. Now it is necessary to define the method ng onInit. Now in order to make use of the method that we have just created, we have to inject the user service into this component. So private user service of the type user service class. Now inside the ng onInit lifecycle hook, we can invoke this method get user profile. So here we go. From this user service instance, we can invoke this method get user profile. This method will return an observer, so we can subscribe to that here. Into that, we can pass an object having this next and error callback. Inside this error callback, we will just print the error object like this. Error while retrieving user profile. Now, if the request is successful, inside this response, there will be the full name of the current user. So in order to save the full name, I'm going to create this property full name. Now inside the success callback, we can assign the value from the response. Response.fullname. Now let's show this full name inside the dashboard component. Inside the component, we are already showing the logout button. Now let me add a wrapper div having this text sender div. So everything inside this div will be placed at the center of the web page. Now let me move this logout button into this div. Just below that, I want to show this h1 element having this bootstrap class display 6. Inside that, we will show this welcome message. Now let me duplicate this h1 element for showing the full name. Inside that, we can show the full name like this, full name. I want to make this text extra bold and let's change the text color. Let me save this, back to the app. See here we have the welcome message, but we can't see the full name. Let's open the developer console. See here we have an error for node 1 unauthorized. This is much expected because unlike the HTTP request that we have made so far from this auth service, this post request for sign up and sign in can be done without being authenticated to the system. But that's not the case with this user service method get user profile. In order to access this user profile endpoint, the user must be authenticated to the system. To prove that, inside the request header, we want to pass a valid JSON web token. For that, we can do this. Let's create an object of request header. Into that, we can assign an object of HTTP headers. Inside that, we can pass the authorization header. Authorization is equal to, like we have already discussed, we have to use this prefix bearer, and then we can pass the JSON web token that we have saved inside the local storage. I think inside the auth service, we have not yet created a function to return the saved JSON web token. So here we go, get token. Now let's return this saved JSON web token like this. Now instead of repeating this statement inside this logged in method, we can invoke this new method get token. Now back to the user service class. First of all, we have to inject the service class auth service. Sorry, here we have a typo, constant. Now let's append the token like this, auth service dot get token. Now all we have to do is just pass this header instance into this get method as a second argument. So here we go, headers is equal to request header instance. Save this, back to the app, boom, that's it. Now we don't have the for node 1 unauthorized error. Now even if you're passing a valid token to consume the Web API endpoints, there might be situations where the Web API will be returning for node 1 unauthorized error. For example, when the token is expired, you will get the error for node 1 unauthorized. How to easily handle such situations will be discussed at the end of this video. Now, for accessing any protected Web API endpoints, we have to pass the JSON web token like this. In order to avoid repeating this operation in multiple places, we can make use of Angular interceptor, which act as a middleware. So this is what I'm gonna do. Inside the app structure, into this shared folder, let me add this interceptor, auth interceptor. We have already created this environments folder. Now let's create this auth interceptor. So open the terminal. You could see the respective command inside this CLI reference, then ng generate interceptor. Let me copy this and pasting the same here. We want to create the auth interceptor inside this folder shared, and we want to name it as auth. Hit enter. So here we have the newly created interceptor, auth interceptor. Now this will act as a middleware. So all the HTTP requests will go through this auth interceptor. For that, first of all, we have to register this interceptor inside the app config file, app config.ts. While invoking this method, provide HTTP client. Inside the method, we want to invoke this method with interceptors. Into that function, we have to pass an array containing the new interceptor that we have created, auth interceptor. Now back to the auth interceptor. Now by default, inside this method, you could see that this next method is invoked by passing the request object. So by default, this interceptor does nothing. Whatever request comes, it hand over the request as it is for the next step. But now we have to modify this interceptor to append the saved JSON web token along with the Web API request. So first of all, we want to check whether the current user is already logged in or not. For that, we have to inject the auth service. So here we go, auth service. Let's invoke this method inject. Into that, we have to pass the respective service class, auth service. From that, we can invoke this method is logged in. If that's the case, first of all, we'll create a cloned object of this request received at this interceptor. So here we go, cloned request. To clone the object, we could do this request.clone method can be called. At the same time, if we want to modify any of the properties inside the request, we can do that. So this is the right time for modifying the authorization header. So here we go, headers is equal to request.headers.set method can be called. Here we can pass the JSON web token inside the authorization header. So let me copy paste that from this user service. Let's copy this and pasting the same here. Auth service.getToken. We have to pass the key value pairs like two arguments. So instead of colon, use comma. Now from this auth interceptor, we can pass this modify request for the next step. So here we go, return, and we have to invoke this method next. Inside that, we can pass the cloned request. Now from here onwards, in order to access protected Web API endpoints, we don't need to repeat this operation in each of the places we make the request. All of the requests will be gone through the HTTP interceptor. If the user is already logged in, we'll append the user JSON web token like this. Else, we'll propagate the request as it is for the next step. Save this, back to the app, reload the page. It works perfectly fine. Now we can discuss the third type of Web API methods. Apart from authenticated to the system, these Web API methods have criteria defined with role, claim, and policy. Now to discuss the rest of the topic of this video, consider we are creating a Web API project for an educational organization. So first of all, we have role. Most often, the organizational designation will be treated as the role. No need to explain much. In whatever organization you are, your role or your designation determines your permissions, your responsibility in the organization. So conventionally, ASP.NET Core Identity Framework has been treating role as a different property to be considered for authorization purpose. Now considering the example project, we could have the roles like admin, teacher, student, etc. And then we have claim. You could think of them as pieces of information about the user. So any information other than the role will be treated as a claim. For example, user ID, which we have already added to the JSON web token, then age, gender, then the class or grade in which the student is studying, then library ID, etc. And finally, we should be familiar with the term policy. You could think of them as a criteria defined with role, claim, and when we want to combine roles and claims, there will be a logic in between them to connect each other. For example, admin only means only the user with the admin role can access the particular Web API method. Then we have admin or teacher, female teachers only. All of these policies will be defined and corresponding Web API methods will also be created in rest of this video. So without further ado, let's get into it. So first of all, let's look into this user table columns. We have user ID, user name, email, then password, phone number, then full name, which we have added through the app users model here. And rest of these columns are created corresponding to the default properties from this identity user model. Now we have to add columns corresponding to these claims here. And along with that, we have to add the role. As I already told you, the ASP.NET Core Identity Framework already treated role as a different entity inside the identity framework. As a result of that, inside the DB, you could see a separate table for roles. Into that, I will directly add the roles that we have seen here: admin, teacher, and student. In a real-world project, you will be having Web API methods to implement the correct operations over the entity role. But in order to save the time, I will directly add the roles into this SQL Server table. So here we go. First of all, we have admin. Inside the normalized name, just enter the capitalized version of role name. Then we have teacher. Finally, student. Now I will show you how to assign these roles to the users that we create during the user registration process. Before that, let me add few more properties to the user table corresponding to these claims here. Age, gender, and library ID. For that, I will modify this model for app user. First of all, we have the property corresponding to the gender. Then we have date of birth from which we can calculate the age. And finally, we have the library ID. Now, in order to add the respective column into the SQL Server table users, we have to do the migration. So first of all, let's build this project and make sure there is no error. We have a successful build. So open the package manager console. Let's do the migration. Add migration. I will name the migration like added gender, date of birth, and library ID. Finally, we have to execute this command update database. Back to the DB, refresh the tables. Let's expand this ASP.NET users columns, date of birth, gender, and library ID. Inside this table, we already have two users added from previous tutorials. Now for better clarity, I would like to remove those rows here. So here we go. Delete from the table. Execute. That's it. Now let's update the user registration web API method accordingly. So here we have the method to handle the post request for the user registration process. First of all, let's change this model to receive the data that we send through the post request. User registration model. Into that, I want to add these properties: role, gender, age, and library ID. For the sake of explaining this topic, instead of using the date property for date of birth, I have used age. Okay. Now inside the method create user, let's feed the data into respective SQL Server tables. As you already know, there is no property for role inside the user table. So if we want to assign a role from this table rows into a user from this table users, we have this table user roles. The corresponding user ID will be added to this column user ID and the corresponding role will be added to this column. I will show you how it is done from the Web API part, and then we can see how it is added in the respective table. For that, after creating the user, we can assign the role like this. It's an async operation, so I will prefix it with this keyword avoid. From this user manager, we can invoke this method add to role async. As a first argument, we can pass the user object that we used for creating the user. Second parameter should be the role that we want to assign to this user, that we can retrieve from the user registration model role. Now, in order to work with roles, we should add the respective services into this project. Along with adding the handles and stores, here we have added the framework, entity framework stores. So let's add the services related to roles. Here we have to specify the model that we use for roles. We are using the default model from the identity. That will be identity role. For user, the default entity is identity user, but we have customized it into app user. But for the entity role, we have not made any customization. So we'll use the default entity from the identity framework. Now back to the user registration web API method. So this will assign the role passed to this web API method for the newly created user. Now in order to feed the data for rest of the properties while creating this user object here, we can assign the properties like we have done for other properties here. Gender from gender. Now for the property date of birth, from the current date, we are minusing the years as much as age we pass to the web API method. And finally, we have assigned the library ID like this. So this is all the modification we need for the rest of the discussion. Now I'm going to create different users having different values of role and claims. To make the process even more simpler, I'm going to add a JSON file to this project folder directory. Add new item, and I will select this template for JSON file. Let it be user details. Inside that, I will paste an array of objects corresponding to the users that we want to create. so that it would be easy for you to do the same what I am doing here. So first of all, here we have a user with the role admin and rest of the details are here. Now build the project. Let me copy this object back to the API Explorer, and here we have the post web API method for sign up. For the user we are about to create, there is no library ID. So rest of the properties will be like this. Now click on execute. Boom, that's it. So here we have successfully created the user, and you should see the same in the respective SQL Server tables. First of all, we have the users table. So here we have the new user, and inside this user rows, you should see the admin role added to the new user. See, here we have the user ID for the newly created user ending with C28, and we have assigned the admin role for this user. So this role ID should be the ID of the admin role inside this roles table. See? So that's how this table users rows connect both the entities user and role. Now like this, we have to add rest of the users. So to save time, I will pause the recording of this video and I will be inserting rest of these users here. Now finally, I'm done with adding all the users. Let's re-execute the select query for users. So in total, we have added 7 users. Now instead of selecting all the columns, let's select only the columns that we really care about. Let's execute the select query again. Let me order the result based on the column full name. From these users' full name and email address, you could know what is their role, what is their gender, what is their age, all of that. So at present, we have 1 admin, 2 teachers, 1 female teacher and 1 male teacher, and 4 students. 2 male students and 2 female students, and out of which only 2 students is having library ID. If you check the user roles table, you could see that all the users are assigned with respective roles. Now, before going forward, I want to make few updates inside the Angular client side while making the post web API request for the sign up or user registration. Because we have added few more properties into this user registration model, as you can see here. These properties, role, gender, age, and library ID, are the additional expected data for creating a user. So here we have the user registration form. Apart from these form control data, we have to pass the data for the newly added property inside the web API. So back to VS Code, then open Auth service. Inside that we have made the post request for the user registration. So first of all, I will add this warning here. Here we are passing default value for role, gender, age, and library ID. Now for the sake of explanation, here we are just passing the default value. We are not adding any respective form controls inside the front end. I will leave that up to you. Either you can change this sign up form into a multi-step form for feeding the data for these extra properties. Or you can create a separate page or separate component to feed the data. For now, I'm just hard coding the default values like this: role, gender, age, and this property library ID is optional. So from now onwards, if you are using this interface here, behind the scene you will be creating a female teacher with the age 35. Now back to the web API. Now you know what we have to do. When any of these users get authenticated to the system, we have to save these information, role and claims into the JSON Web Token payload. Then only these informations will be available for defining authorization criteria. Remember, when a user successfully authenticated to the system, we generate the JSON Web Token. And all the necessary information should be added to the JSON Web Token payload. So whenever we try to access a protected resource with a JSON Web Token, during the process of validating the token will be decrypted or unpacked into the claims principal. And whatever we have inside this claims principal can be used for defining the authorization criteria. So back to Visual Studio, let's update the sign-in endpoint. Inside the method with these 2 statements, we will find and assign the user into this user object if there is a user with the given email and password. Now inside this if clause, we have all the details of the user from this users table. And along with that, we need the role assigned to the particular user. For that, we can do this. We'll have this object roles, and we can invoke this method get roles async from user manager. Inside that, we just need to pass the user object. Since we have an async method, just prefix the invocation with this avoid keyword. Now, like we have added this user ID claim, we need to add few more claims. So what I'm going to do is I will just cut this, and I'm going to assign the same into a variable of the type claims identity as claims. Now we can add the necessary claim. First of all, we have gender, then age that I will calculate from the date of birth. And finally, we have to add the role of the user. Instead of using a string as a key for the claim, we have to pass this role property from the claims type. And here we have assigned the role that we have retrieved here. Now, along with these claims, I also want to add the library ID as a claim. Not everyone has a library membership. So I'm going to do this. If the user has a library ID, we can add the corresponding claim into the payload. So here we go, claims.add claim. Inside that, we can provide an instance of the claim like we have done here. Library ID. From the user, we have to assign the property library ID. While defining this model property here inside the app user itself, you could see that we have defined it as nullable. And for the same reason, you could see this green squiggly line here saying that this property is nullable, so you cannot expect always a value from this property. Since we have added this if clause here, we can ensure that this claim will be allocated with a proper value. So in order to ignore this warning, all we have to do is, as a suffix, we can add this exclamation mark. That's it. Now we can pass this claims identity object claims into this subject here. Let's build this project. Back to the API Explorer. Let's try to log in with a user that we have just created. For that, I will make use of this JSON file, userdetails.json. We only need to copy this email address because this much portion of the email address is given as the password for all the users inside this collection. So here we go. So this is the admin user and here is the password. Let's make the request. Boom. Let me copy the token. Now let's go to the official website for JWT authentication and just paste the same inside the debugger. We have already discussed how to make use of this debugger interface in previous video. Just paste the token here so that you could see what's inside the payload. See, we have all the claims that we have added from the login web API method. User ID, gender, age, role, etc. So all of these are available inside the claims principle to define the criteria for authorization. Now what I'm going to do is I will just copy this JSON web token and I will add the same along with this object here. I will add a new property called token and let's save the token that we have got with a successful authentication for the user here. It would be helpful to test the web API methods that we are about to create. Now let's see how the payload of the user having the library ID. Let's copy the email address. Here we have the email address and here is the password. Let's make the request. Here is the token. Let's copy this and pasting the same inside this debugger. Boom. Along with other claims, you could see the library ID here. Now let's copy this token and let's append the same to the respective object here. Now like we have added these two tokens for these two users, let me do the same for rest of the users also. It will be necessary for testing the configuration of authorization in various web API methods. So a successful token for every user is added into this JSON file here. Now, in order to define authorization criteria with role, claim, and policy, I'm going to create a new C# class file for demo endpoints. I will name it as Authorization Demo Endpoints. Let's change this class into static. Now let me copy paste this method for map endpoints. Let's rename this method to map authorization demo endpoints. Let's invoke this method inside this program.cs file. Now let's see how to define a web API method accessible only for the users having the admin role. So here we go. We have an endpoint admin only. I will handle this request inside this method admin only, and let's define the method here. For now, from this method we are only returning this string admin only. Now if you want to restrict this web API method only users having the role admin, you can do this. First of all, we want to add this authorize attribute. Into that, as an argument, we can pass the criteria like this: role is equal to admin. So whenever a user tries to access this endpoint, the middleware will verify the user has an admin role, else the request will be denied. Let's build this project and let's test the new endpoint. For that, first of all, I'm going to use the JWT token of a student. Copy it and back to the API Explorer, and let's paste the same here. So here we have the new web API method that we have just added. API/admin only. Let's make the request. Boom. We got the error for no3 forbidden. Do you remember when you tried to access the second type of web API method here, if you are not authenticated to the system, the response status code was for not one, meaning unauthenticated, meaning that you don't even have a JSON web token. Now we got a server response with the status code for no3, meaning that you are authenticated to the system, but you don't have the required permission to access the web API method. Let me show you that once again. Just clear the JSON web token and just try to access the web API method again. See, this time we got for not one. So that's how the status code works. Now let me try to pretend as a user having the role admin. So that will be the JSON web token of the first user. Let me copy this and let's set it as the bearer token. Let's make the request again. Boom, we got the status code 200, meaning everything went successful. And here we have the proper response from the web API method. Next, we have to check whether the user is having either admin role or teacher role. So here we go. Let me copy paste this endpoint. The corresponding route will be something like this: admin or teacher. Instead of defining a separate private method here, I'm going to make use of a lambda expression like this. For now, we will just return this string admin or teacher. Now, like we have defined the authorization criteria here, we can add the attribute authorize. Along with admin users, we also need to consider users having the role teacher. That's it. Sorry, instead of adding the authorize attribute here, we just have to give it here as a prefix to this lambda expression. So that's how we can define authorization criteria using only roles. Now, if you want to make use of claims or a combination of claim and role, you have to define a policy, meaning a separate criteria should be defined inside the project. That we can do while adding the authorization service. Along with defining this fallback policy, we can define policies like this. Options dot add policy method can be called. Now let me define a policy with this name has library ID. So this is the name of the policy. And as a second parameter, we can pass the condition or criteria with a lambda expression with this parameter policy. All we have to do is we just need to check whether there is a claim library ID. As you already know, inside the users that we have created, there are users without a library membership. So we want to check whether the user is having the claim library ID. We can check that by invoking this method require claim. So we will check whether the user has the claim library ID. Make sure that the same name is used while saving the same into the JSON web token inside this sign in method here. Library ID. Make no mistake, the same should be provided here. So here we have created a policy or criteria called has library ID. Now we can make use of it while defining authorization criteria. To save time, I will just copy paste the Web API method here. So here we have the URL of the Web API method, library members only. As the name suggests, this Web API method should only be accessible for users having the library ID. So here we have given the authorization criteria with the policy that we have just created, has library ID. Let's build this project. Now let me copy a token of a user having no library ID. Back to the API Explorer, just set it as the bearer token. Since we have defined the method with lambda expression, you could see them under the name of the project, which is Auth API. So here is the newly created Web API method, API/library members only. Click on try it out and let's make the request. See, we got the error 403 forbidden because the current user does not have a library ID. Now let's try the same with a user having library ID. Send the request. Boom. We got the status code 200 and we got the proper response from the Web API method. Now in order to create Web API methods having these requirements, let me add few more policies. Let me copy this and pasting the same below. I will name this policy as females only. So instead of checking whether there is a claim gender or not, we want to check whether the claim gender is having the value female. For that, as a first parameter, we can pass the name of the claim, and then as a second parameter, we can pass the value that we want inside the gender claim. Okay, female. Now along with the gender value female, if you also want to consider other values for this claim, for this criteria, we can pass them one by one after the female value here, like gender 1, gender 2, so on. Okay. Now finally, let me define one more policy for users having the age under 10. So I will name the policy as under 10. In order to define this criteria, we want to check whether the age of the user is less than 10. The comparison cannot be done with these methods here. For that, we'll make use of this method require assertion. Inside that, we can pass a callback method with this lambda expression having the parameter context. Inside this context, we have this object user. Inside that, we have the claims, which is corresponding to the claims that we have added into the JSON web token. From that, we want to check the value of the claim age. So here we go. X time is equal to age. And from that, we want to retrieve the value. In order to convert this same into an integer, we can wrap this entire property with this method invocation int32.parse. So this much portion will give us the integer. Now we want to check whether it is less than 10. So here we go. So these are the policies that we need for defining Web API methods having these authorization criteria. So let me save this and back to this demo endpoints. Now here we have the get Web API method for applying maternity leave, and it is only applicable to female teachers only. Inside this authorize attribute, first of all, we have set the requirement that this is only for users having the role teacher, and they also must satisfy this policy females only. So this is how we can combine roles or policy or claims for defining authorization criteria. Let me build this project And let me copy the JSON web token of a teacher, male teacher. And let's set the same as the bearer token here. Let's try to apply for maternity leave. See, we got the error forbidden. Now let's try the same pretending we are a female teacher. So here is the user. Let's copy this token and let's provide it here. Let's make the request again. Boom. Now finally, I want to define a web API method for females under 10. So here we go. Under 10 females. For that, we have used two policies. Policy under 10. So the user must be having the age under 10 as per the policy that we have created here. This policy. And along with that, the user must be having the policy females only. So when we apply authorize attribute separately with the policies, both the condition must be satisfied. So only female users having the age under 10 can access this web API method. Build the project. Let's pretend to be a user having age under 10 but he is male. See, student, male, having age 9. Let's copy this token. Back to the API Explorer. Let's set the bearer token and let's make the request. See, we got the error forbidden. Now let's try to pretend a female student having age 9. Boom, that's it. Now let's head over to Angular client side and let's implement these authorization using role, claim and policy. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I will create Angular components corresponding to these endpoints which we have used for demonstrating the web API authorization. So back to VS Code, let's open the terminal. So in total, we have to create 5 components. So here we go, G for generate, C for component. And we want to create these components inside a folder called Authorize demo. First of all, we have admin only. Hit enter. You could see the newly created component here. Now, the reason for using the same name as that of the endpoint inside the web API is that we are assuming that inside this component, we have some admin only operations. So we'll restrict this component only to the admin users. Same is the case with the rest of the components that we are about to create inside this authorized demo folder. Now let's create the next component, admin or teacher. Apply for maternity leave, library members only. Finally, under 10 and female. So these are the 5 components that we need for demonstrating the authorization inside the Angular client side. Now, since we have made a lot of changes inside this web API, first of all, build the project. Now back to the app. If you are already logged in, please log out, because inside the web API we have added few more claims into the JSON web token that we needed for demonstrating the authorization. So in order to retrieve the newly added claims inside the client side or inside the JSON web token, we have to re-log in into the application again. Now let me log in with admin credentials. Now, before implementing the authorization inside this Angular app, I want to configure the routing of this app to include newly added components, and we also need navigation links to navigate the routes. So back to VS Code and let's open the routes file app.routes.ts. All of the routes that we are about to add for these new components inside this authorized demo are protected routes. So the respective route must have this property can activate assigned with this auth card. And this auth card will only allow the authenticated user to access the route. So let me copy paste this dashboard route object for the new component admin only. So here is the path admin only. and the respective component will be admin only. And we need this can activate property assigned with auth card. Now similarly, let me add the route object for rest of the components. So here I have added the routes in this similar order: admin only, admin or teacher, apply for maternity leave, library members only, and finally under 10 and female. Now you can try any of the routes that we have added by directly entering the routes like this: admin or teacher. And you could see the default paragraph from the newly added components. Now for all the routes that we have just added, and for this dashboard, we want to show a top navbar and a side menu. And into the top navbar, we can move this logout button. And inside the side menu, we can show the different nav links corresponding to the routes that we have added. For that, what I'm going to do is I will add a parent route object like this, like we have added for this sign in and sign up routes. So here we go. Path will be an empty string, and then we have to provide a component, and that will act as a layout component. So here we go. First of all, we have to create a layout component. So open the terminal. We want to create a component, and that should be created inside a new folder called layouts. And we want to name the component like main layout. Hit enter. So here we have the new folder layouts. Inside that you could see the component main layout component, and here is the corresponding HTML file. We can add the top navbar and side menu in a bit. First of all, let me add this router outlet. Now it is necessary to import the same inside the component TypeScript file. Now let me update the app structure. We have just added the layouts folder. Inside that we have the newly added component main layout. Now back to the routes configuration. Now for this parent route, I will set the component as the main layout component. Now we can add these routes as a children to this parent component here, like we have done here. So here we go, children, which is an array. Now let me cut these routes from here, and let's put them inside this array. Now each of these routes will be shown in place of this router outlet here. Beside this, we'll be adding the top navbar and the side menu in a bit. Now one more thing. All of these routes are made protected with the same guard, auth guard. So instead of passing this can activate to all the children routes, we can pass it through the parent route object like this. Can activate is equal to an array containing the auth card. Now we can remove this auth card from the children components like this. So we made these children routes as protected by setting the can activate to the parent route object like this. Now back to this main layout, and let's add a top navbar and a side menu. After that, we can protect these Angular routes based on the role or claims assigned to the signed in user. First of all, I will add a div having this ID main, and inside the div, first of all, we'll show the top navbar, and just below that we have to show the content of the route. So let's move this router outlet into it. To add the navbar, let's go to the official documentation of Bootstrap, and let's search for navbar. Then go to this section, nav. I will copy this navbar here, this one. Let's copy this back to the layout component, and let's paste that just above this router outlet. At present, this is how it looks like. First of all, I want to leave a space for the side menu, so I want to add a left side margin for this top navbar or the entire main div here, this one. So open the global style sheet, and let's set this margin left to 240 pixel. Now let's move this logout button into this top navbar. At present, it is inside the dashboard component. Let's cut this. Then back to the main layout. Let's paste that just after this search form. Now we also have to move the click event. So back to dashboard component TypeScript file. Let's cut this back to main layout, and let's paste that inside this component TypeScript file. Now we have to inject the necessary services. For that, back to dashboard component and let me copy paste this constructor into the main layout. Let's import this router and this auth service. For now, we don't need this user service. Now let me add few more padding to the top navbar like this. On horizontal axis, we need a padding of the range 5 and that of the vertical axis will be of the range 1. And we have to do the same for the content of the route. For that, we can add this wrapper div having these clauses. Let's set the maximum top margin and from all the sides, we will add a padding of the range 5. Now let's move this router outlet into it. That's it. Now for the side menu, we can do this just before this main div. We can have this nav having this ID sidebar and let's apply these bootstrap clauses. Navbar, we want to set the background color with this clause and we'll assign the entire vertical height to this sidebar and here we'll set the flex direction to column. And finally, we have to assign this clause justify content start. Now open the global style sheet, styles.css. Inside that, we'll modify the appearance of the sidebar like this. We have set the position with these 3 properties and here we have set the width to 240 pixel, which is the exact margin that we have assigned to the main content. Okay. Now let me remove this app name or brand name from this top navbar and we can show that inside the side menu here. For that, we can have this div having these bootstrap clauses container fluid, justify content center, and let's apply a padding of the range 1 from all the sides. Inside that, we can have this anchor element to navigate the dashboard. So let's apply these bootstrap clauses. Navbar brand H1 typography. Let's make the containing text bold. Let's change the text color to success and let's apply a bottom margin of the range 3. Instead of this href attribute, we have router link having the path /dashboard. And here is the anchor text auth easy, which is the name of the app. Now in order to make use of this router link, first of all, inside the TypeScript component, we have to import router link. So here we go. Now just beneath that, we can add nav links for each of the components that we have inside the app. For that, back to the main layout component HTML, just below the anchor element, we can have this unordered list having these bootstrap clauses nav and then we will set the flex direction to column and let's allocate the 100% width and let's apply a horizontal padding of the range 3. Inside that, here we have the list item having this bootstrap clause nav item. Now let's add the anchor element for the route admin only. So here we have the anchor element having this bootstrap clause nav link. Instead of href, we have router link assigned with the path /admin only. Now let me copy paste this for the next route that will be admin or teacher. Admin or teacher. Inside the first anchor element, we'll show this text admin only and that of this will be admin or teacher. Save this back to the app. So this is how the nav links looks like. In order to customize their appearance, let's update the global style sheet. So here we have changed the appearance of the menu items and here we have the mouse over effect. And this is the final result. Now at present we are logged in with an admin user. So both of these routes should be accessible to this user. Now suppose if the logged in user is a student, then we should prevent the user from accessing both the routes. So let's check how to protect an Angular route based on the logged in user claims or roles. That we can do with Angular guards. So here we have the auth guard. Inside that, we have already denied unauthenticated users from accessing protected routes. Now to implement the additional criteria based on the user claims or roles for each routes that we have inside this route configuration, we have to specify the criteria that we want to check before allowing the user to access the route. That will be different for different routes. For example, this route can be accessible for admin users, and this should be accessible for anyone having the role either admin or teacher. So first of all, inside the respective route configuration object, we will make use of this property or object data. Into that, we can pass an object like this. Now to implement the feature, I'm gonna pass a callback function like this, claim requirement. So through this property, I'm passing a callback function having a single parameter c, which refers to the claims of the user. And inside the callback, we just need to check whether the user has the role admin. You will get a clear picture once we reuse this callback inside the auth card. Now let me copy paste this inside this admin or teacher route. So for this route, the user must have either admin or teacher role. So here we go. Role is equal to admin or teacher. Now before passing the claim requirements for rest of the routes, let's head over to auth card and let's see how to make use of these callback functions. Before moving forward, let me tell you this. The term claim refers to any information about a user. So while we are outside the web API, the term claim is also referring to the user's role as well. Now, inside this auth guard with this if clause, we only allow the route access to authenticated users. Now, the additional claim requirements that we are about to impose are only applicable to the already logged in users. So instead of returning the true right away, we'll check whether the user passed the claim criteria given by the activated route. So first of all, inside this if clause, we have to retrieve the data that we have passed inside the route object. So here we go. Claim requirement is equal to, we can retrieve that from this route parameter. Route.data. So with this property data, we can retrieve the data that we have passed here. From that, we have to retrieve the property claim requirement, and we want to convert that as a function because we have passed callback functions into the property claim requirement. Now, if there is a callback function passed to the claim requirement property, meaning that this route has certain claim requirements, else will return true. There will be such routes. For example, if you have a route or a component for changing the user password, such a route should be accessible to anyone authenticated to the system. So in those cases, for such routes, we will not be passing a claim requirement callback function. Okay, you will see that in a bit. Now, in order to execute this function, remember we have this parameter claims, which is corresponding to the logged in user claims. Inside that, we are checking whether the currently logged in user has the role admin or whether it is having either of these roles, admin or teacher. So first of all, inside this if clause, we want to retrieve the claims of the currently logged in user. So here we have the constant claims. Inside this auth service, we should define a function to return the claims. So here we go, get claims. So like we already discussed, the user claims will be the second part of the JSON web token. The JSON web token is saved inside the local storage. So first of all, let's retrieve the saved token. We already learned that the JSON web token has 3 parts and all of them are separated with a dot in between them. So let's split the token string based on the character dot. So this will return an array, and from that array we want to retrieve the second element. So the respective index will be 1. We are talking about array index. So the second element index will be 1. So that is referring to the payload of the token, or in other words, the claims of the currently logged in user. Now, like we already seen, the payload is actually encoded into the second part of the JSON web token. So we'll decode that with this method, which we have already seen, window.atob. Now you could see this error due to this warning that this method getToken may return undefined. We could say that it won't happen because before invoking this method, we are making sure that the user is authenticated. So in order to avoid this warning, instead of this question mark, we can pass exclamation mark. Now, the output of this function atob will be the stringified version of the claim object. In order to convert that into a proper JSON object, we can invoke this method JSON parse. So that's what we return from this method getClaims. So that's a proper JSON object having different claims assigned by the server API for the currently logged in user. Now back to the auth card. Let's invoke the method auth service dot get claims. Now inside, and if closed like this, we can invoke the callback function like this claim requirement. Into that we can pass the claims that we have just retrieved. Now all of the callback functions that we are passing to the claim requirement will return a boolean value based on the requirement that we are checking here. Hope you already know that here we are using the shorthand version of the arrow function syntax. This is the actual full function. Since we only have a single return statement, we can minimize it like this. And that's what we exactly done for this callback function also. So if the user met all of the claim requirements, this function will be returning true. Now if the function is returning false, meaning that the user does not met all the claim requirements, in that case, we'll be redirecting the user to a route having the path forbidden. The corresponding component or the route is not yet created, and finally we have to return false. If the user has met all of the claim requirements, we'll return true. Now let's create a component for this route path forbidden. So inside the app structure, first of all, let me add the folder, component folder like this. So we are going to create this forbidden component. So open the terminal and let's create this component forbidden. So here is the new component forbidden. Now let's update the route config. We'll add the respective route object into this children array of this main layout. So here we go. Let me copy paste this forbidden. And we want to render this new component forbidden. Now let's update the forbidden component HTML. Instead of this default text, we will have this div having this class text sender. Inside that we can have this h1 element having this bootstrap class display1. Inside that we will show this message oops. Let's duplicate this h1 element, change this class to display6. Inside that we will show this status 403 permission denied. And with this additional paragraph, we'll show this you don't have the permission to view the page. So we have created the forbidden component and we have designed it and we have configured it with the route path forbidden. Let's save this back to the app. Now at present, these routes admin only or admin or teacher is accessible for this admin user. See? Now let's try the same with a teacher account. So I will select this first teacher, email and password. Now the current user is a teacher, so this route admin or teacher should be accessible, but this one should not be accessible to the user, admin only. But to our surprise, this teacher can access this route admin only. How it is possible? It's all because of applying this can activate to the parent component. So at present, the auth card is getting executed only when the parent component is getting rendered. And the claim requirement callback functions from the child routes are not reaching or getting executed in the auth card. If you want to trigger the auth card for the containing child components here or the child routes, we have to pass the auth card to the property can activate child. Okay? Now it works perfectly fine. See? Now let's move on with the next possible restriction based on the user claims. Normally, if a route is not accessible for currently logged in user, we hide the nav link or any navigation leading to the particular route, like this admin only. For this teacher user, this route or the corresponding component is not accessible. So why don't we hide this nav link? Now to do that, we are going to make use of Angular directives. You could see the official documentation here, directives. So back to the app structure I'm going to add the new folder called directives. Into that, we will be adding this directive, custom directive, hide if claims not met. You could see the respective Angular CLI command here. CLI reference ng generate directive. So open the terminal and we want to create this directive inside this folder directives. So here we go, ng g for generate, then d for directive. We want to create that inside this folder directives having this name hide if claims not met. Copy this and pasting the same here, hit enter. So you should see the directive here, directives hide if claims not met. Now the custom directives that we create will have this prefix app, and that of the inbuilt directives will be ng. For example, ng if, ng for, ng switch, etc. Now this is how we are going to make use of this directive. Just copy this selector and then back to the main layout. We'll assign the directive to the respective list item like this. Now into that we'll be passing a callback function like we have done inside the route config, specifying the claim criteria which the user must be met before showing the respective HTML element. Now to make use of this directive, first of all inside the TypeScript component we have to import the same. So here we go, hide if claims not met. Now back to the directive. Now based on the claims we'll be deciding whether we want to show the li element or not. That we can do inside the ng on a lifecycle hook. Similar to Angular components, ng on a lifecycle hook is the inside the Angular directives. So here we go, implements on init. Now it is necessary to define the method ng on init. Now in order to receive the callback function that we have passed here, we can add an input property, input, and we'll be using the same name as that of this directive selector here, meaning that we are directly assigning the callback to this directive here. So this name should be used for the input property here. And inside this directive, we'll name the function as claim requirements set as optional property having the type of a function. Now inside the ng on a lifecycle hook, first of all, we have to retrieve the logged in user claims. So here we go, claims. Now we have to inject the auth service. So here we go, private auth service of the type auth service class. From that, we can invoke this method get claims. Now like we have done inside the auth card, we'll invoke the method claim requirement callback function. Into that, we can pass the user claims like this. Now, if it is not met, you want to hide the respective li element here, this one. For that, first of all, we have to inject the instance of element ref. So here we go, element ref of the type element ref. So inside this object, we'll be having the DOM element corresponding to the li element. From that, we can access the respective HTML element and we'll change the style display to none, and thereby the respective li element will be hidden. Now here we are not yet passing a proper callback function, so let's copy paste that from this route config. Now don't bother about the syntax error here. Going forward with the app development, if there is any change in the claim requirements, we have to update this callback function in this file and this route config, actual route config file here. So that would be a problem. So this is what we are going to do. We are going to create a separate TypeScript file. Inside that, we can define all of the callback functions for verifying the claim requirements. So this is what we are going to do. We are going to create a new folder called utils. Inside that, we can create this file, TypeScript file, claim requirement utils. So here we have the new folder, utils. Sorry, this should be inside the folder shade. So let me move this to this shade folder. Inside that, we can create this TypeScript file, claim requirement utils. Now here I'm going to create a constant object called claim requirements. Inside that we'll define all of the functions like admin only, admin or teacher, and we'll be exporting this constant like this, export constant. So first of all, we have the function admin only. Now let me copy paste the function definition from this route file here. Let's cut this and pasting the same here. Now like this, we need admin or teacher. Now back to the route config. Let's cut this function and pasting the same here. Now we can make use of these callback functions to verify claim requirements wherever needed inside this Angular app. For example, inside this route config, we could do this claim requirement, which is from this folder utils, and from this file claim requirement utils. So this is the exported object. From that, we have to pass this function admin only. Now for this route admin or teacher, we have to pass the function admin or teacher. Now in order to use the same function inside this layout, first of all, inside the TypeScript file of the component, we have to import the same. So import, we are inside the layouts folder. So let's exit from that, then go to shade. Inside that we have the folder utils. Inside that we have the claim requirements utils. From that we have to access claim requirement object. Now we can make use of this object inside the template file here, claim requirement dot admin only. Sorry, just importing this object is not enough. We have to create a property with the same name like this, claim requirement. Into that we can assign the imported claim requirement here. Fine. Save this, back to the app. Boom. See, the respective li element of the admin only route is not visible. Let me log out and log in with the admin user. Boom. These nav links are shown because the current user can access both of them. Now let's do the same for rest of the routes. First of all, I will add the respective claim requirement functions here. Has library ID. Here we just need to check whether the user claims has a property library ID or not. So here we go. We will check whether the property library ID is the inside the object or the claims object. And then after that, we want to check whether the user is female and a teacher. So here is the function. Gender is equal to female and the role is equal to teacher. Finally, female and below 10. So here we go. Gender is equal to female and we have passed the age into an integer and we have checked whether the age is below 10. Now back to the route config. Let me copy paste this data for rest of these routes. Now for this route, apply for maternity leave, we want a callback function to ensure that the user is a female teacher. So pass the function female and teacher. And then we have this route for library members only. The respective function will be has library ID. Let me copy paste the same for under 10 and female, and the respective function is female and below 10. Now open the main layout. Let's add the respective nav links. Apply for maternity leave, then library members only, and finally under 10 and female. Into each of these li elements, we have passed the directive with the respective claim requirement function. Save this, back to the app. At present, we have an admin, so only these two nav links are accessible. Let's log out. Let's log in with a female teacher. Only this one is accessible. Why not this one? Female and teacher. Sorry, for this route, admin or teacher, we have not yet assigned this directive. Let's copy paste that here. Admin or teacher. Anyway, this menu item for applying maternity leave should be accessible to the current user and for any female teacher. So what happened? Sorry, there was a problem while passing the claims from our web API. In order to see the actual problem, you could do this inside this directive. Let's print the returned claims like this. See, inside the return claims object, see, the recommended naming convention for claims is camel casing. But inside the web API, we have used Pascal casing. Inside this Angular app, we have used the camel casing. See, library ID, gender, but inside this claims object returned from the web API, we have Pascal casing. So let's change that inside the web API. So first of all, let's open this identity user endpoints, and inside the sign-in endpoint, here we are passing the user claims. Let's change this to camel casing. Before that, first of all, we should find all the places we use the Pascal casing. For that, we can make use of the find utility, and let's search all over the current object, and let's find all of the places where we have used this name user ID. So first of all, inside the controller, while retrieving the user profile details, so let's change that to camel casing. Let me copy this, and then here we have the property user ID. That's not a problem. And then inside this sign in endpoint, and then we have inside the migrations, that is different. Let's keep that. Now let's do the same for gender. Let's search all over the project. This is inside the user details JSON object. Let's keep that. And then we have this sign in endpoint. Let's change that to camel casing. Let me copy this, and then we have the same while defining the policy here. Let's update it here. Now back to the sign in endpoint. Next we have age. Let's find all over the project. First of all, we have inside this sign in endpoint itself, update it to camel casing. Let me copy this, and then we also have the same while defining the policy here. Back to the sign in endpoint. The role property is already in camel casing. Finally, we have to update this one, library ID. Let's search, enter the project. Let's select this match case option to avoid irrelevant results. First of all, we have inside this sign-in endpoint itself. Let me copy this. Then we have, while defining the policy, has library ID. Then we have inside the migrations. That's not a problem. Let's build the project in order to reflect the new changes. Back to the Angular client side, log out. We must log out in order to receive the updated claims object. Let's try login again with the teacher account. See, here we have the updated claims object. Boom. Now we are showing all the routes which are accessible to the current user. Let's try login with a student account. This user has a library ID and is a girl below age 10. So both of these nav links are shown. So that's how to protect a route or a component based on the claim requirements. Now we are not done yet. Now suppose inside this dashboard, we have a button, and that can only be accessible for an admin user. How can we do that? So open the dashboard component. Here we have the button having these bootstrap clauses btn, then btn danger. Inside that, for now, we'll just show this text, some admin operation. Now we only want to show this button for admin users. So what I'm going to do is, we can make use of this directive here, this one. Let me copy paste this directive of the list item of the admin only hyperlink. Now to make use of this directive and this claims functions, we have to import the same inside the TypeScript component here. So let's import the directive hide if claims not met, and then we have to import the constant like this, shared /utils/ claim requirement utils. From that, we want to import the object claim requirement. Now let's create a property with the same name. So here is the property, and let's assign the imported object into it. Let me save this. Back to the app. At present, the currently logged in user is a student. Let's try with an admin. Boom. How cool is that? Now finally, I want to show you how you can handle request responses having the status code 401 unauthenticated, 403 forbidden. It could happen. At present, we have hidden or restricted the access to a component or a route or a button like this if the currently user does not has the necessary permissions. But there could be situations like token expiration or because of some malpractices by the user, the web API will be returning request responses like 401 or 403. So we have to handle that properly inside the Angular app. We could do that inside the auth interceptor. Inside that, we are already passing the JSON web token if the current user is already logged in. So this is exactly a middleware. All of the requests pass through this interceptor. So at present, this is what we are doing inside the interceptor. If the user is already logged in, we will clone the request by assigning the authorization header with the respective valid token of the user. And then we have propagated the same clone request with this next object. Now to handle the 401 and 403 request responses, we just need to tap into the observable returned from the next method. So here we go. We can invoke this method pipe. Inside that, we have to invoke the function tab, which is from RxJS. Into that, we can pass an object like this. Into the property error, we can pass a callback having a single parameter error of the type any. Inside that, we will check the status codes 401 and 403. If the status code, let me rename this parameter to this one. If the status code is equal to 401, we will handle that inside this if clause. So 401 corresponding to unauthenticated user, meaning that don't have a valid token. The token that we have passed here is not valid or it is expired. Now the token that we have saved inside the local storage is not valid. So first of all, let's delete that, and we want to redirect the user back to the login page. So first of all, let's inject the router from Angular. Now here we go, router dot navigate by URL /sign in. Now along with redirecting the user, I want to show a toaster notification. So let's inject the toaster service as toaster. Now we want to show the toaster notification once the sign in page is rendered. So we will add a small delay, so we can invoke this method set timeout. Let it be 1.5 seconds. After that, we will show the toaster notification with info method. So the toaster will be having the blue color. Inside that, we just need to show this. Please log in again. And the title will be something like this: session expired. Now instead of a 401 status code, suppose we are getting a 403 error, we could handle that inside this else if block like this. We just need to show the toaster notification saying that, oops, it seems like you are not authenticated to perform the action. Now let me show you what happens when you get this 401 status code. For that, we just need to consume the web API when the token is expired. So what I'm going to do is back to the web API, then inside the sign in endpoint, here we have set the expiry time of the token as 10 days. Let's change that into 1 minute. Now we also have to change how we want to validate the JSON web token. That we can do inside this identity extensions. Here we have defined how do we want to validate the JSON web token. First of all, we want to set this property validate lifetime. By default, it is false. Let's set that to true. Now, in order to avoid considering the time standards, we can set this clock skew to time span 0, time span dot 0. Let's rebuild the project. Back to the app, log out, try login again. Now inside the dashboard, we have made a request for the user profile to retrieve the full name of the user. Now try reloading the page after 1 minute. Boom! That's it. So that's it guys, we have discussed all about implementing authorization in an Angular app with ASP.NET Core Web API using various permission requirements like claim and role. Please comment below your feedbacks and how you want to extend this series further with features expected in an Angular auth system. So that's all for this video guys. You can clone this project from the GitHub Repo link given below in video description. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't yet. Please like and share this video with your friends and colleagues so that they can also benefit from this. See you in the next video.